Hello. Before I begin this episode, let me remind you that both this and our last instalment were inspired by the ongoing work of Film is Fabulous. Film is Fabulous is a charitable organisation in need of support. Any donations will help to fund their mission to save vulnerable film collections. You can donate to Film is Fabulous as a one-off, and that's hugely appreciated, but the best way to support their ongoing work is to set up a regular payment. As a supporter, you will receive invitations to their events so that you can see some of the rare and missing items they recover, exclusive podcasts and videos with insight, interviews and progress reports, Q&A opportunities, regular updates on Film is Fabulous's activities, and, well, they're looking into merchandise. Sue Malden, Toby Jugs, anyone? Well, we can but hope. To learn more and become a regular supporter of Film is Fabulous, email donate@filmisfabulous.org.uk. On a more personal note, welcome new listeners, these podcasts are only made possible, free to all and without adverts, thanks to the support I receive at patreon.com/Toby Haydock and ko-fi.com/Toby Haydock. So if you are able to head over to either of those places, then please do. If not, liking, subscribing, thumb-upping and 5-starring wherever you get your podcasts really does help me, and it costs you nothing but a little of your time. Thank you. Welcome to Indefinable Magic, random jottings in the Journal of Impossible Things that is the overactive mind of a Doctor Who fan, which take verbal form as he also has an overactive mouth. He being me, Toby Haydock, who writes and performs these. Tonight's episode, Fantasy Film Cans, Part 2. There is no such thing as macra. Well, not right now. Welcome back, and thanks for joining me, especially if you endured the torture and over-explanatory cascade that was Part 1, in which we counted down the whole stories that fans of Doctor Who would like returned. We also received input from Doctor Who himself, David Tennant, Dalek operator Nicholas Pegg, and the writer of a number of Peter Capaldi episodes, Peter Harness. And we had the stars of the day, Peter Purvis, Annika Wills and Fraser Hines, telling me which Who stories they'd like back, as we counted down to a surprise winner, the Mythmakers just beating Power of the Daleks. So if you haven't heard the previous instalment of Indefinable Magic, well, maybe you should. Don't leave it languishing in the Mormon church basement of your podcast app. A brief recap, though, just so we're all on the same page. Recently, I set some friends a challenge, and it sounded a bit like this. I'm at a car boot sale, and look, there's a stall with 17 film cans. They are all Doctor Who, and they are all missing. The beauty of this scenario, though, is that you get to choose what those 17 episodes are. They can be any missing episode of Doctor Who, but, and here's the horrible catch, because the search for missing episodes needs a dollop of heartbreak, it's part of the job, these will be the last episodes of Doctor Who ever to be found. After this, there will always be 80 missing episodes of Doctor Who. So, what are the 17? You decide. Since episode 1 went out, loads of people have posted on the Film is Fabulous Facebook page with their choices, which will doubtless be more representative than my 112 responders. But, frankly, if you want to tabulate and cross-reference those, then be my guest. But I drew a line, and I ain't getting my eraser out now. But if this steers you to the Film is Fabulous Facebook page, well, then that's all the better. That's where they'll be keeping people up to date. A few folk have also added their thoughts to my Twitter and Blue Sky streams, and my YouTube channel too, so feel free to pop over to those as well, and remember to subscribe, like and follow and do all the things you meant to do in those places. In Fantasy Film Cans Part 1, having done the whole stories from least desired to most, I also started the countdown of individual episodes that people wanted back. And so, previously on Indefinable Magic, here is what was stuck at the bottom. Bottom in joint 94th place were Galaxy 4 Episode 1, 400 Dawns, Galaxy 4 Episode 2, Trap of Steel, The Ice Warriors 3, which I referred to as The Ice Warriors Episode 3 at one point, and that's enough to make me almost go back and redo the whole damn thing, because it's actually called The Ice Warriors 3. And The Space Pirates, which is called Episode 3. In 93rd place, we had The Savages Episode 2, along with various things that weren't even in the poll, thanks to a certain manifestation of clever clogsiness that one must never be surprised to get from Doctor Who fans. In joint 89th, there were The Daleks Master Plan Episode 9, Golden Death, and The Faceless Ones Episode 2, The Faceless Ones Episode 4, and The Faceless Ones Episode 5. And joint 81st were The Reign of Terror 5, A Bargain of Necessity, The Celestial Toymaker 2, The Hall of Dolls, The Celestial Toymaker 3, The Dancing Floor, The Underwater Menace Episode 1, The Ice Warriors 2, The Abominable Snowmen Episode 1, The Space Pirates Episode 1, and The Space Pirates Episode 4. So, those episodes are gone, withdrawn, deaccessioned, and junked, with not many positives and a fair few negatives piled up against their name. But before you start Pamela gnashing your teeth, fear not, because all partially complete stories are still in play, bar the Ice Warriors. We will not be hearing from them again in this podcast. They're held in the permafrost forever. But, you know, they were last time, and look what happened. While there's life, there's... Anyway, for the rest, it is all to play for. And the votes have come in from all over. From new series and forthcoming War Between the Land and the Sea writer Pete McTighe, from Big Finish Doctor Stephen Noonan, Big Finish War Doctor Jonathan Carley, and Big Finish Companion Conrad Westmass, and from writers Simon Guerrier, Eddie Robson, Jacqueline Rayner, and James Goss, from the Sontaran Strax, Dan Starkey, to fans of yore Stephen James Walker, Keith Miller, and Jeremy Bentham, and many, many more, including this gentleman in a league all of his own.
Hello, Toby. Well, 17 is an unbelievably generous amount for this car boot sale. I wonder where they've all been. But I'm glad they're there. Anyway, I'll be happy with any of them, but I'm going to go for, whilst trying not to be too obvious, I'm going to go for Evil 7, Snowmen 1. It's like the football pools, isn't it? Macra 4, Power 1, The Smugglers 3, Master Plan 12, all of the Mythmakers, all of the Massacre, and the first 3 episodes of Marco Polo. I think that's it. Gosh, imagine. And I would be happy with any of them, but if none of them are the Space Pirates, that's okay by me. Bye! Oh, and if you want reasons, maybe you want reasons. Evil 7, obviously, the final end. That would be amazing, wouldn't it, to finally see the Emperor. Snowmen 1. I love the Abominable Snowmen, and I have such a fondness for the Target book and its blue spine, and that whole idea of the scene in the TARDIS and the little... The magic bell, whatever it's called, in the Dead Sin Monastery, that fills me with joy. Anything from Macra, I just love to see it. Power 1 speaks for itself. Obviously, it's post the first regeneration, and everything about that I think is more important than the rest of the story put together. The Smugglers 3 is a bit of a strange thing. I'd just love to see it. Equally something from the Highlanders. But the Smugglers 3 is what my friend Michael and I always talk about. If anything could come back, just an ordinary episode, just one, then we always say Smugglers 3. Master Plan 12 speaks for itself. The Mythmakers and the Massacre absolutely need to be back and seen. And I'd love to see all of Marco Polo, but if we're limiting it to 17, then I think maybe the first 3. Or maybe 1, 2, and 7. I don't know, it's your car boot sale.
Thank you, Mark Gatiss. That was Mark Gatiss. Isn't that incredible? But one of Mark's choices has unfortunately been the victim of a miscount. My thanks, sort of, to Ed Stradling for pointing this out. I've rejigged the count for this episode, but it does mean that there's an error in the tally I've literally just read out. The Abominable Snowmen 1 should be one place higher. This is because Ed, the only person I know who keeps his Doctor Who DVDs in release order, didn't put The Abominable Snowmen episodes 1, 3, 4, 5 and 6 like a normal human being might do. No, instead he put The Abominable Snowmen open brackets 5 close brackets, i.e. the 5 remaining episodes. Of course he did. So I misinterpreted that when I was doing my totting up. So I'd love to go back and redo the previous episode, but also I just lied, and I can't think of anything I'd love to do less. So scrub what you heard last time. The Abominable Snowmen as a whole story should actually be one place higher than it was in last week's episode. So it's on a par with the Daleks' Master Plan and the Wheel in Space. Still an underperformance, I would say. And episode 1 shouldn't have been in last week's episode at all. It should, in fact, be in the first batch of episodes covered in this one that I'm about to do right now. Anyway, despite the frustration, I'm supposed to be doing my accounts and writing that script and clearing out the attic, I'm happy that the Yeti have made a bigger footprint than I'd initially thought. And it's a footprint that has been accurately described and placed from here on in. So we're all good. And now, anyway, we have more guests to come, having welcomed and thanked Mark Gatiss. But for now, and everything's in the right place this time, let's recommence that countdown. A quartet come in together in joint 77th place. On 4 votes each, and that's 3.5% of the vote, we have The Underwater Menace, Episode 4, The Wheel in Space, Episode 2, The Wheel in Space, Episode 4, and The Abominable Snowmen, Episode 1. And so we have to pull the plug on The Underwater Menace. This was the only instalment keeping it afloat. People were drawn to this one because of its action-packed nature. Atlantis gets flooded, with a lot of water tank filming used, and punters are intrigued to see how that was pulled off. It's fair to say there's a bit more affection for this story than there was back in the day, and the closer to completion it gets, the more people might want to see what is left of it back. But for now, well, it's sunk. It seems appropriate in this story of missing episodes for some of us to want to see more of an adventure about a man who tried to destroy something just because he could. You hear that, BBC? Mad as a hatter, the lot of you. So let's not get fixated on The Abominable Snowmen Episode 1, okay? But let's say our first spotting of it last time was a hoax, but its position here is the genuine article, thanks to it being voted for by Mark Gatiss and Ed Stradling, among others. If it keeps rising at this rate, it had no votes at all until very late in the process, and then when it did get some, I neglected to count one of them. If I'd kept the poll going for another week, it might well have ended up on top. But no, it's staying here. Next up, we get 2 of the remaining 4 episodes of The Wheel in Space. Episodes 1 and 5 have fared slightly better than these 2, and it's worth having a look why. Interestingly, seeing as many people liked voting for Companion's first and last appearances, they don't do that here, with this being the lowest rated Companion entrance and or exit. Wendy Padbury-Zoe, of course, debuts in The Wheel in Space, but not until its second instalment, which makes this one fly in the face of the general voting patterns elsewhere. I'm surprised Johnny Morris didn't vote for it. He likes Nanina's bum in The Savages 2, but he doesn't want Tanya Lernov's nose in The Wheel in Space 2, despite the fact that bum and nose both belong to the same actress, Claire Jenkins. Obviously not a nose man, our Johnny. Wheel in Space 2 is also the first time the Doctor is referred to by the John Smith alias he later commonly adopts. Now, he doesn't adopt it here, though, as Jamie does it on his behalf. For the Doctor is concussed. Yes, maybe that is why this episode hasn't done especially well. Many voters want to see more of the inventive Patrick Troughton in action, but he is out of it here. Fewer people, it seems, need to see any more of stand-in Chris Jeffries as the sleeping version of the Time Lord, or the Snore Doctor, as he will from now on be known. So then, Wendy Padbury's first week at work was one without the leading man present, but that's not her only issue, as Zoe's debut finds her laughing at Jamie because of his kilt, which starts the Jamie-Zoe relationship off in an amusing manner. But Zoe's a really interesting character in this, her debut, and they're clearly making an effort to portray her as a flawed genius whose traits, many of which we'd now describe as being on the spectrum, I think, make us sympathetic towards her awkwardness. But Zoe isn't actually the most awkward thing about Wheel 2 and 4. You ain't seen nothing yet, kids, as both of those episodes also expose us to the somewhat more awkward Keith Chang, the Mickey Rooney of Doctor Who, as played by a fine actor, Peter Laird, who, as he once told a friend of mine, played a lot of Chinese in those days, for which he'll be a laird of recrimination if he's not careful. Because, look, if you find John Bennett's dignified Lee Sen Chang in Talons uncomfortable, then Keith, no relation, is going to have you so fidgety it'll be like you've got billybugs in your breeches. Laird is in the extant episode 3, but mercifully he doesn't say anything in that. Alas, there's nowhere to hide him in the shadows of the 2 episodes that surround it. So perhaps it's a mercy that in terms of returns, these 2 have been misses. Go lightly in your search for them, lest we need to confront some rather unfortunate stereotyping. It's a shame, as obviously the depiction of the crew was conceived to be forward-thinking, a future utopia in which different races work together in harmony. But to modernise the manner of that depiction is, shall we say, unfortunate. Or the worst thing ever, and everyone from the old days is a racist, if you're a half-wit. On the other hand, among the non-speaking crew are actors of colour Yinka Adebayo and Dorothy Sue, both of whom can be seen clearly in episodes 2 and 4. So, small steps, but steps being made nonetheless. And their increased visibility by the return of these episodes would be most welcome in a way that, alas, Chang's might not be. Episode 4 also has some enticing spacewalk sequences, some fabulous material for Zoe, in which she frets about being too logical and not emotional enough, and plenty of cyber action, with a high body count too, as both Chang and likeable Aussie Bill Duggan are killed. And of course, one of those departures is less of a relief than the other. Oh, it's got a memorable cliffhanger too. Colin Varney Earworm chose Wheel 4, but not, for the record, 2, and he also chose the higher rating 5, because together with the existing part 6, both 4 and 5 would, says Colin, provide a lovely final chunk of that story, which fired my undercooked imagination, because Colin watched it at the time. I'm always delighted to hear from viewers who saw those episodes go out, so thanks for that, Colin. I'm jealous. In joint 75th place, with 4.5% of the vote, it's The Reign of Terror 4, The Tyrant of France, The Abominable Snowmen, Episode 3, and The Abominable Snowmen, Episode 5. Now then, the majority of those voting for The Reign of Terror 4 and 5 to be returned together did so in order to complete Season 1, for they wanted Marco Polo as well, you see. Only Ian Potter, who you'll recall from the previous instalment of this podcast, counts a lack of telesnaps as an extra reason to mark an episode for attention, didn't. But anyway, Marco Polo aside, there were extra votes for just episode 4, whereas no one wanted episode 5 on its own, of this French Revolution story. It's a personal triumph for me, as I loved him as an actor, and he was in a play I wrote and happy to talk about Doctor Who as we made it. For the voters choosing this stated it was worth getting because it was the TV debut of the wonderful Ronald Pickup. Well, I can think of worse reasons to choose an episode, and indeed, I will be reading quite a few of them out loud during the course of this podcast. But Pickup went on to have an incredible career, and it seems a shame that his one entrance into the televisual Whoniverse should be from one of the few chunks of this story that we don't have. This episode also has more of Edward Brayshaw as Leon Colbert, a darkly attractive, charming rogue who turns out to be a baddie. So it would amuse me no end were it to be intercepted before broadcast and have the new series master theme added to the soundtrack whenever he walks in, just to infuriate the easily combustible. From a Tyrant to Tibet, as the poor old underappreciated Abominable Snowmen's third instalment continues this story's poor performance in this poll. It might have performed better initially had I learnt to count. But anyway, stop worrying about that, Toby. Episode 3 got a late boost thanks to a clerical error, actually of a different kind from the one I've already mentioned. But you'll have to wait until next time to find out all about that. Oh yes, more clerical errors to come. I know how to draw you in. Talking of clerical errors, Monk Ralpachan does a lot in episode 3 of The Abominable Snowmen, which means I'll have to spend a lot of my time resisting going onto forums and telling people that he isn't played by Harold Pinter. If you don't know that hoary old myth, perpetrated by many who should know better, that I'm referring to, then good. That said, considering what's happened with this very story in this poll, that's my sole responsibility. Perhaps I shouldn't be pointing out mistakes made by other people with quite such piousness. I think the modern parlance is that I shall now take time away from all of this to reflect and learn and grow, but only once I've counted down another 70 or so episodes. Other highlights of this episode, apart from the actor David Barron, who isn't and has never been Harold Pinter, include some lovely Yeti chess piece action and some beautiful, spooky nighttime location filming. And keeping episode 3 of The Abominable Snowmen company during those lonely nights in the darkness is episode 5, and this episode is, frankly, brilliant. Its climax feels like all the terrible things in the story are coming together at once, and it's really exciting and dramatic. DVD content producer Ed Stradling loves it. In fact, he loves the whole story, and could actually make that clearer sometimes. I thought he'd only voted for this until he showed me how to read, but anyway, he says, "Of all the serials I've not seen, I now think that this is the most likely to be my favourite." This episode brings us face to face with the hitherto hidden Padmasambhava. Well, all right, he's revealed in the previous instalment's cliffhanger. He's played by Wolfe Morris, who'd previously appeared in another Abominable Snowmen sci-fi horror tale, Nigel Neal's The Creature, both on television and in the subsequent film version, which is called, helpfully, The Abominable Snowman, just to add to the confusion. The Creature, though, is also lost. But, as it's not Doctor Who, I think it's fair to say that we can find that at another car boot sale, preferably with Nigel Neal's The Road as well, but I'm getting distracted now. This episode features plenty of Yeti action, episode 5. It also has the apparent death of Padmasambhava before his shock reawakening, the actual death of Rin Chen, and the hypnotised Victoria. Would this story's reputation go up if we found this particular instalment? Or, to bet your life it would. Joint 71st, on 5.4% of the vote, we have 4 episodes. Galaxy 4, Episode 4. All the 4s, The Exploding Planet. The Daleks' Master Plan 8, More Explosions, Volcano. The Savages, Episode 3, and The Wheel in Space, Episode 5. And just so that you note, I actually re-recorded that bit so that I said The Savages episode 3 when the first time round I said part, because I knew somebody would say something and it would make me want to kill again. Anyway, I know my audience. And so, that is it for Galaxy 4. It exits proceedings, not with a whimper, but with a bang. A bang big enough to result in an exploding planet. These were the only votes that Galaxy 4 got. It has the Rills to thank for its showing here, as it's the only instalment in which we get a proper look at them, albeit behind a glass screen. We have no decent photographs of this sequence, so it'd be nice to know if we actually get a visual of the full beast. Though James Kersey rightly points out that you'd get double your money with the exploding planet, says James, "I want to see those Rills and the tease for Mission to the Unknown that would reveal some nice things about that episode." Ah yes, the tease for Mission to the Unknown in which Jeff Garvey wakes up and states his intention to kill, which would give us a look at this unphotographed character and his unknown costume, and a chance to say Hydrax, Hydrax, as he's played by the mighty Barry Jackson. There's also the possibility that this sequence might have been snipped for foreign broadcasts, though, as Mission to the Unknown and the Daleks' Master Plan weren't sold to other territories, so if this episode ever does come back, well, we might not actually get it back with this bit in it. But as for now, I am the god of car boot sales. As far as this fantasy is concerned, I will be generous and let this sequence be one of the known knowns of Mission to the Unknown, should we get Galaxy 4 back. Look upon my uncut episodes and don't despair. This will be good news for Oliver Crocker from the Bill podcast, who says, there are so many moments without visuals or much dialogue in Galaxy 4 Episode 4. In the absence of telesnaps, I'd love to see what happened. I'd personally rather see this over Mission to the Unknown, perhaps controversially. Well, that's woken me up, feeling psychopathic urges. I must kill Oliver Crocker, it seems. Jeremy Bentham will be spared my wrath, though. In a life-saving manoeuvre, Jeremy has actually chosen both Mission to the Unknown and this episode. See, Oliver, that's how it's done. Assuming Mission to the Unknown was found at the same time as this episode, says Jeremy, we would have the totally complete prequel to the Daleks' master plan. For me, though, the big selling point for this episode would be seeing the Rills, all three of them, in their glass-fronted environment, debating respect for all life forms, irrespective of their appearance, with the Doctor. It's a central point of the whole story, but while I know I saw it, memories of this scene do not extend to recalling the actual size of each Rill relative to the heights of the TARDIS crew, even though there is at least one group shot inside the Rill's chamber mentioned in the script. Photographs, and what we can see from the existing third episode, suggest the Rills were puppets operated from below. Does this mean, then, that the three were mounted atop some kind of tank or hollowed stage so that human operators could work them? Another mystery awaiting a definitive resolution. David Gillespie Pratt wants Galaxy 4 more for what it can do for other episodes. The exploding planet, says David, would let us better reconstruct the ending of Airlock. The existing version of Episode 3 has a compromised climax due to damaged film. And to get a look at Garvey at the end. He's another one who wants that little bit of mission. A sensible use of resources, David. Our ways of thought, at times, do not seem all that different. The Daleks' master plan, well, that's a much more popular story than Galaxy 4, isn't it? And yet here, an instalment of each are on equal terms. Whilst not the least popular episode of Master Plan, Episode 8, Volcano, isn't as popular as most of the rest of the story. Remember, two people, including David Tennant, want all of Master Plan back, so 8 as an individual episode only has a small percentage of fandom on its side. And yet it does have one major selling point: the first speaking appearance of the little-seen alien, Salation. Yes, he's in Day of Armageddon as a silent extra, but Volcano is the first time he is played as a speaking role by actor Terence Woodfield, who gives him his speciality sibilance. And doubtless some funky body language too. We also get the final appearance of spiky delegate Trantis, played by Bert the Miner, who gets horribly exterminated and, if the Australian censor notes are anything to go by, gets reduced in death to a foaming mass of bubbles, which provokes revulsion in Mavic Chen. We also get the delightful sequence featuring a cricket match at the Oval, which excellently spoofs Test Match Special and has Drathro actor Roger Brierley perfectly personify an eccentric English commentator. Bruce Whiteman is also very droll as his dull Australian sidekick. Brierley reacts unflappably to the TARDIS landing during a game between England and Australia. It's a very jolly scene, and whilst various historians have worked hard to piece together how the stock footage and the specially filmed moments from the cricket match would have married together, it'll be nice to see exactly how it was realised. The episode, which sees the story delve further into the comedic with Dennis Spooner writing, and is part of the story's transformation from dark space opera in its early instalments, also sees the welcome return of the monk, played by Peter Butterworth. So there's a lot to recommend it, even though the guff with the TARDIS ring and the locked time machine outstays its welcome, if I'm honest, and may account for the relatively low placing of this episode compared to a lot of the other instalments of Master Plan. And I think it's fair to say that people covet its futuristic thrills more than its comedy interludes, because Doctor Who is, of course, a very serious thing indeed. And the third Hartnell in this merry band, with just over 5% of the vote, is episode 3 of The Savages, the second instalment of this strange story to enter the poll. The telesnaps are tantalising, says Lee Wood, whereas Mark Trevor Owen sums up a lot about our experiences of this one. The Savages episode, 3, says Mark. I'm so unfamiliar with this story. The one where Frederick Jaeger plays the Doctor, basically. And that has been the draw for this episode. Hartnell is not much of a presence in the instalment, but he's not on holiday. He is actually in it, but he's just dragged around semi-conscious for much of the duration. The Doctor, instead, is represented by guest star Frederick Jaeger's well-observed imitation of the character, as elder leader Jano starts to adopt the personality of our hero, having drained some of his life essence. There's also lots of lovely cave action and appearances from 2 characters, Tim Goodman's guard and a new savage played by John Dillon, who don't appear in other episodes. Goodman still acts today, and it's an early appearance from him. Dillon, on the other hand, we know nothing about. He disappears after this, so there are 2 different actor bases covered there, which may be very much my own personal territory, but that's where I've welcomed you in, so sometimes you have to tread where I do. Colin Varney Earworm chooses this episode of The Savages and its finale, despite actually not enjoying them as a kid. Take that, 8-year-old me, says Colin. Oh, stop whining and grow up. Glam rock is coming. You'll like it. Well, like it or not, I'm loving Colin, aren't you? I could do with a bit of his life essence. And finally, in spins another instalment of The Wheel in Space, a story quite unpopular for some time before a late flurry of votes spared its blushes. Episode 5 is more popular than episodes 2 and 4, mostly due to the death of the character Dr. Gemma Corwin. That's definitely former DWM assistant editor Peter Ware's reason. One of the best scenes in the whole story, actually, that death, on the available evidence. There's also some fisticuffs, including the death by laser blast of character Elton Laleham, and plenty of cyber action. And also, bonus, no Keith Chang. And now, in joint 65th place, with 6.3% of the vote each, it's 6 episodes of equal popularity. The Daleks Master Plan 3, Devil's Planet. The Daleks Master Plan 6, Coronas of the Sun. The Celestial Toymaker 1, The Celestial Toy Room. The Savages, Episode 1. The Smugglers, Episode 3. And The Highlanders, Episode 3. And so we have 2 more episodes of the Daleks Master Plan enter the fray here. Now, the weird and wonderful delegates have been cited as a reason for voting other episodes of Master Plan, but not this one. And yet, I have a pet theory that they do actually appear in Devil's Planet as well, even though this isn't widely recognised in the halls of Doctor Who scholarship. You see, M.J. Matthews, who, by the way, I think is Bill Matthews, who has credited roles in Episode 1 of Doctor Who and Silurians and in The Mind of Evil, but let's not get distracted by that, and Jack LeWhite are credited as extras in the paperwork for Devil's Planet. And yet nowhere in the camera script is it suggested that we need any more male convicts than the 3 whom we encounter who speak, Bors, Garge and Kirkson. However, there are some delegates mentioned in the camera script. They move away from the about-to-be-exterminated Zephon. So more delegates are required, so I think that Matthews and LeWhite are playing those. But that begs the question, which delegates, if they are delegates? Are they yet another Malfa and Salation, who'd been played in the previous episode by different non-speaking artists? So why not get them back? Is one of them the Christmas tree? Surely not. New delegates altogether? Unlikely, but who knows? Look, I'd love to see this one, to find out. And I'd actually love to see any more delegate action in whatever form it takes. But mostly, if this comes back, I'd love to preen when my theory is proven correct. Although, of course, it might not be. But hey, at least I'm honest. Devil's Planet also has the Screamers, doubtless named after a certain subsection of Doctor Who fandom, who are really swooping alien bird beasts who terrorise the convicts on Desperis. And among those convicts is the aforementioned Kirkson, played by Douglas Sheldon, who has an important part in Doctor Who history because he's responsible for the cliffhanger which places Katarina in, it turns out, mortal peril. As for episode 6 of the Daleks' master plan, Coronas of the Sun, well, like every episode of this epic, it has something that will be enlightening to see. Namely, in this case, the Vizian, an invisible alien whose death by Dalek effect was achieved by filming a white-sacked actor in negative, and so producing a pitch-black, ghostly shape that was enough to give the Australian censors the willies. This, by the way, is a very clever joke, because the actor playing the Vizian in the sack was called Francis Willy. But the fact that I am the only person in the universe who will get this joke that I have laboriously had to explain to you here and now means that I should probably not get furious when the BBC people in charge of making Doctor Who tie-in broadcasts dismiss me as being, and I quote, niche, which they have, and I do. Anyway, it's your niche I'm filling, listeners. Enjoy me. The thing about filling a niche is that you get inside every nook and cranny of it. So enjoy me filling your niches, babies. And whilst we have it, I mean, whilst we're at it. Haven't you noticed that we're at it, dear listener? Whilst we're at it, we may talk about the extant episodes of The Faceless Ones and The Space Pirates not having the titular baddies visible in them. Well, even if we got Coronas of the Sun back, we'd see neither Coronas nor the Sun, because, as far as I can ascertain, neither feature in it. And so even were this to return, I doubt we'd be given any further clue as to why this episode is actually called this, unless, like the Vizians, they are invisible Coronas and invisible suns. Maybe there's somebody slumbering nearby who might be able to give me assistance. What I'm saying is I need a waking ally to sort this out. But what we do get in this episode, though, a vision of the Vizians aside, are some glorious verbal interchanges between a waspish Dalek Supreme and an arrogantly dismissive Marvick Chen, who will always be worth the price of admission to any episode of Masterplan alone. Oh, and talking of admission, Sarah Kingdom enters the TARDIS for the first time in this episode. So, that's a landmark of sorts. The Celestial Toymaker, Episode 1, The Celestial Toy Room, that is opened up here, meaning that this will be the last we hear from this story, as it's the highest placed instalment from it in this poll. Now, the Celestial Toy Room actually has a clip from a missing episode of The Massacre in it, so that's a bonus reason for choosing it. You get a soupçon of missing material from elsewhere. Now, don't knock it. I remember before the return of Evil of the Daleks Episode 2, one of the appeals of the Wheel in Space 6 was that it had a clip from Evil 2 at the end of it, so these things should definitely be considered. Aside from that, it's pretty obvious why the Celestial Toy Room is the highest scoring of the Toymaker episodes. Over to Patrick Mulkern of the Radio Times. This just sounds so bizarre and magical, says Patrick, and has always seemed one of the key episodes of Doctor Who. The all-powerful Toymaker, the creepy clowns. I have friends, non-fans, who watched this as kids, and it has stayed with them. Oh, wish they'd stayed with us, Patrick. Simon Farquhar cited this out of love for Toymaker actor Michael Gough, and Gough is clearly an actor popular with Simons, as TV producer Simon Harries nearly chose this because, again, he wanted more of this mercurial actor. Simon was heading in the Toymaker's direction, but in the end he went elsewhere. From the comments, though, Gough is one of those rare actors to be reason enough to want an episode. As for Doctor Who magazine writer Alistair McGowan, he says, I love this story, but episode 4, which is the one we have, is clearly the poorest. I want to see some more weird magic, so episode 1 it is. Another episode 1, that of The Savages, has scored pretty highly for a story that isn't talked about that much. Rick King Byatt chose this one for the same reason quite a number of you did. He says, all that gorgeous location work. And this is actually another landmark for Doctor Who. The very first occasion that a quarry stood in for an alien world. And also, actually, The Savages 1 has more location filming than any previous episode of Doctor Who. Not more film work, because some previous episodes had film work that included interiors and Ealing shoots, etc. But this is the story up to this point with the most location filming, so it will have looked awesome. Richard Smith was more interested in the interiors on videotape, though, drawn to the chance to tour the City of the Elders that this instalment affords. So it seems we love this one inside and out, but it's mostly out, because, as I said, there's all this lovely film work, and it takes up an impressive chunk of the episode's running time. And if the telesnaps are to be believed, these sequences are pretty handsomely done, with a smaller TARDIS prop used to add scale to proceedings. As for The Smugglers 3, it is the least requested episode of the story it comes from, with no one really singling it out for special attention, apart from Mark Gatiss, whom you heard at the top of the show, and his self-confessed reason was that it was just a random example, plucked from the ether, that he invokes to suggest an episode no one really talks about. Well, Mark talks about it, as his friend Michael, the writer Michael Dennis, whom he evoked in his voice message, has just popped in to say. Michael tells me, "I'm the friend Mark Gatiss refers to. It's true. If either of us hasn't texted the other in a while, one of us will break the silence with, 'Time for a missing episode, surely.' The Smugglers Episode 3 has become our archetype for 'we'll take anything,' not because it's dull, 2 deaths, and that shot of Cherub peering through a bush in context, but simply as it's a random episode from a story that isn't especially fated. But I'd have it back like a shot. In a way, we're all after Dead Man's secret key, aren't we?" Couldn't have put it better myself, Michael. It does have the very unusual sequence of the Doctor dealing out the tarot cards for his captors, and there's the rather gruesome death of Jamaica that we have bits of thanks to the Australian censor. Then there's the sequence of Cherub hiding behind the bush that we can see being shot by the film cameraman in that behind-the-scenes cine film that we have that was captured on location, alongside a few other scenes from this episode, which the cine films cover. And indeed, there's a reasonable amount of location filming in this episode. In fact, the filming for The Smugglers is spread pretty evenly across all 4. Considering it's the 3rd instalment, that's not bad. And our third instalment of this sextet is The Highlanders 3, this entirely absent historical's least popular instalment, which is a shame, as it has the unique claim to fame that it is the only episode in which the title character spends its entire duration in drag. Fan lord with a brain the size of a planet, Jeremy Bentham, who watched this story go out, observes that existing telesnaps show that many of this story's film scenes were set at night, not least those involving the Ealing Studios film tank that was dressed either as the quayside at Inverness or as the hull of Trask's ship, the Annabelle. Night scenes always add an extra layer of spookiness to Doctor Who serials, augmented here by some very effective mood lighting. This episode makes good use of its water tank footage. At the beginning, when Trask warns his prisoners on the tender that as a dead body tipped overboard from his ship is the only way they'll leave the Annabelle before its destination is reached. Then later, during the lengthy cliffhanger ending, as Ben is dropped from the yardarm to face a ducking in the water that seems to conclude with his death. And if that wasn't enough to merit this episode's return, there's also the highly amusing scene midway through of Kirsty and Polly desperately trying to engage the sleep-deprived Doctor's enthusiasm for devising a plan to rescue Ben and the Highlanders. He's up for it, of course, but in typical Second Doctor fashion, pretends that he isn't, whilst already covertly pondering a plan to himself. The Highlanders 3 also features both ends of the spectrum of this story, really. The high road of drama and the low road of comedy, if you like. It has the grim, dingy stuff with all the prisoners shackled together, and some genuinely freezing cold-looking material on the ship's deck and in the water tank. But then there's also the fun and games with Polly and Kirsty disguised as orange sellers and running rings round Algernon Finch. And it has the Doctor's stovepipe hat, although I think the received wisdom now is that it's not actually called a stovepipe hat, but let's not get into that. So the Doctor is in drag, and he has his special millinery, whatever it's called, a sartorial collision that you won't see anywhere else in the entire history of Doctor Who. I should like an episode like that. But more of you would like the episode in 64th place, having accrued 7.2% of the vote. It's The Smugglers, episode 2. So, The Smugglers 2 beats its successor, but why? Well, essentially because Missing Episodes expert Gavin Rymel copied his choices, bar a few pointed changes, from Missing Episodes music expert Jess Jerkovic, and neither of them actually shared the reason for choosing this particular episode of The Smugglers over others, so it must remain a mystery, and it's a choice that was born of Jess. Episode 2 does have a rather unpleasant scene in which Ben and Polly convince poor, simple stable boy Tom that Polly is possessed with the spirit of a warlock, which show them wielding what might nowadays be described as future privilege. But other than that, it's just a representative instalment of this somewhat unrepresentative adventure. Great characters, lots of ripeness, some nice location filming, the regulars all enjoying themselves, and a terrific guest cast. The definition of a jolly romp. A Jolly Roger romp. Jolly romp is a very Doctor Who descriptor, isn't it? And so is Monster Season. And we have 2 examples of that in joint 62nd place, with 8.1% of the vote. It's The Abominable Snowmen, episode 4, and Fury from the Deep, episode 2. There's lots of fun to be had in episode 4 of The Abominable Snowmen. There's a memorable exchange in which the Doctor reveals his clever plan to get the Yeti's attention is to bung a rocket it. There's plenty of top-class Troughton and Hines action this week, lots of Yeti footage, and some wonderful, spooky, gloomy scenes shrouded in darkness. The action really ramps up here too, and at the end of the episode it has Chrysong standing up to the possessed Songson and refusing to leave the monastery. It's a tour de force, benefiting from a strong performance from favourite Who-thesp of many seasoned actor spotters, Norman Jones, later Major Baker in Doctor Who and the Silurians, and Hieronymus in The Mask of Mandragora. I genuinely believe that if we had one of these later instalments of The Abominable Snowmen, as opposed to the sole surviving episode 2, people might be hungrier for a bit more of this. I'm excited just thinking about it, just talking about it, even though it's unlikely to be among my choices. So, I can hardly blame the rest of you. Oh, curse this game. Radio Times scribe Patrick Mulcairn remembers, it starts with the Yeti reviving and attacking Victoria, then rampaging through the monastery. Then there's all the filming in Wales with Yeti, but especially the scene with the Doctor and Jamie and the reactivating sphere as a Yeti stands dormant by the police box. The incredibly eerie cliffhanger when Victoria walks into Padmasambhavar's sanctum and his face is finally revealed. Jonathan Carley, Big Finish's War Doctor, also chose this episode. For me, I think this is one of Victoria's best episodes, he says. She is front and centre, brave, cunning and capable. It completely debunks the cliché that she's just a screamer. Also, I'm eager to have a glimpse of Padmasambhavar, which on the soundtrack is such a chilling performance. Talking of chilling, joining the Yeti at this juncture is Fury from the Deep, episode 2. Now, I wonder if this episode would have done a lot better had we not had its most memorable scene. The one in which Messrs. Oak and Quill exhale gas onto Maggie Harris. Oh, if you haven't seen this surviving clip, then seek it out immediately. It is one of Doctor Who's most shocking sequences, and probably the only classic Who scene to give adult me goosebumps of fear. The introduction of Mr. Oak and Mr. Quill lends the story a real air of the extraordinarily unnerving, and the rotund and cheery John Gill is an ultra-polite menace as Oak, whilst the cadaverous, silent Bill Burridge as Quill is an amazing creation. And the existing 50 or so seconds we have demonstrates that director Hugh David really was on a mission to frighten. This instalment was singled out by Tom Byatt, possibly the survey's youngest voter, I think, but mostly it was chosen by people who also chose the rest of the story as well, with its other instalments scoring higher than this one as individuals. It does have one of my favourite cliffhangers, though, as the ever-present thump, thump, thump of the weed creature frays the nerves of the refinery crew, and John Abeneris Van Lutyens informs everyone that it is down there, in the darkness, in the pipeline, waiting. Oh, I'd have this back in a heartbeat. And the weed clearly doesn't have to wait for very long, as it's among the 4 episodes making up joint 58th place and 9% of the vote, where we have The Moonbase, Episode 1, The Moonbase, Episode 3, Fury from the Deep, Episode 4, and The Wheel in Space, Episode 1. Now, we're getting to some episodes that people really like here. The Moonbase 1 was singled out for the Kirby wire effects on the moon, whilst Paul Vanez's, producer and episode finder extraordinaire, for whom this is a favourite story, wants to complete the whole adventure and says that the first episode is super creepy. The 2 people who voted for this episode alone, the rest of you voted for episode 3 as well, singled out the Kirby wire shenanigans on the moon's surface as being the main selling point for this episode, although it does also have other notable moments, the atmospheric scene in which scientist Ralph is zapped and the cyber reveal cliffhanger being a special highlights. Exactly the same number, but not exactly the same people, wanted to see the return of Moonbase 3. No, not the languid misfire of a series made by Barry Letts and Terence Dix that was itself lost but returned some years ago without actually setting the world on fire. But we're talking about The Moonbase, Episode 3, which was chosen largely because, as Richard Smith points out, it is the only time we really get the Cybermen interacting with the humans. There are some great cyber scenes in this, even though it has the Cybermen uncharacteristically dissing our heroes for having stupid Earth brains. There's some terrific stuff here, though. Benoit has a tense chase on the moon's surface where he has to outrun the Cybermen in order to help Basil Fawlty out with Gourmet Night. We get Polly doing her smart Polly cocktail mixing, which results in some foamy cyber death, and we get a rare internalised monologue from the Doctor in which he muses to himself, sharing dialogue with his inner thoughts about the cyber plans. It's a shame we have 2 copies of Episode 4 of The Moonbase, but no copies of Episodes 1 and 3. See also The Faceless Ones 1, which appropriately has a double, when most of the rest of it doesn't even have a single. Another outburst of fury next, this time Episode 4, which was chosen by that exemplary trivia miner, David Gillespie Pratt. Check out his YouTube videos. David says he wants this one so we can enjoy the whole sequence down the impeller shaft. Now, yes, we do have a bit of Van Lutyen's journey down below, but it was by all accounts a memorable sequence and well worth seeing in full. And more John Abineri would definitely be spoiling us, especially as he gets a rather terrifying reception from the seaweed beast. Abineri himself told me that he thought the story was really creepy and very well done. That the Australian censors sequestered a key part of this sequence, though, means that people might think we have enough of it, and accounts for this one being one of the lower-placed episodes of Fury, which is a popular story whose love has been spread quite evenly. One of those profligates with this kind of love was listener Colin Varney Earworm, who chose this and the next 2 episodes of Fury from the Deep because they rattled my delicate nerves way back then. I'm always thrilled to hear from correspondents who actually witness this stuff, as I say, first-hand viewers. Oh, I so envy you, Colin, that I'm foaming at the mouth. And now another cyber story and another first episode, and a curiously popular one this, seeing as, well, actually very little happens in it. It's so lacking in incident that even the regulars have a kip during it, but that just goes to show that you never quite know what will be popular. As well as the servo robot, which featured in lots of people's reasoning for having this one back because it's the servo robot's only appearance, the fact that much of this instalment is a two-hander between Patrick Troughton and Fraser Hines meant that a significant chunk of its advocates wanted it back so we would have more examples of their unique chemistry, demonstrating that not everyone desires content that they haven't seen. A decent number of viewers actually desire more of what they already know and what they know that they like, which in this instance is a testament to one of the show's best-loved pairings, isn't it? As Gary Russell says of Wheel 1, it's a Troughton and Hines masterclass, while James Kersey says that he's chosen Wheel 1 just for the fun of 2 and Jamie arsing around for 25 minutes. Yep, I'll take that. For Jeremy Bentham, his reasoning for wanting this episode back is somewhat more particular. This is a purely selfish and personal choice, as it's one of the very few Doctor Who episodes I never saw broadcast, says Jeremy. Hence, I missed the servo robot in its one and only appearance. And, until I got to read the scripts and hear the audio recordings, I later realised I'd missed out on David Whittaker effectively resetting and redefining the bond between the Doctor and his companion, open brackets, S close brackets, by presenting this virtual two-hander episode where the affection between the Doctor and Jamie comes across as touching, comedic and profound. Yep, the two have lunch and Jamie has a kip. You don't get that in these days of frenetic 42-minute episode plotting. So, yes, lunch and a kip. Well, none of us would turn either of those things down, would we? In this case, we get to watch them. And so Wheel 1, which has no Cybermen and barely any of the plot, is the most requested episode of this story, and so it's highest placed, which means that even being quite boring, as Wheel 1 I think is less offensive than Keith Chang. So, hey-ho. I mean, Wheel 1 doesn't even have Zoe, although it does have Victoria, on film on the beach being left behind. And so this is, actually, officially Deborah Watling's last episode, not Fury from the Deep Six. But nobody cited that as their reason for choosing this. I just thought I'd drop that in because it's that kind of podcast, innit? But this wheel turns for the very last time, as that's the last occasion we'll see it in this poll. But who knows? 2 of its episodes have been found in the wild. So more of it could well be drifting out there, ready to be found. And so we turn to joint 56th place, and a pair of Troughtons with 9.9% of the vote each. Those episodes are The Macra Terror, Episode 2, and The Faceless Ones, Episode 6. Good dose of Troughton and some much-missed Season 4 here. And this particular episode of The Macra Terror was chosen by Dylan Reese because the story is in full swing here, great opportunity to see all the sets. Whilst Jeremy Bentham, who did see this one, observes that John Davis only directed this one story for Doctor Who, which is a shame because he really got the best out of his single and allegedly very expensive Macra prop with its snapping claws and its foam-slathering jaws, as the start of this episode with its tight zoom-in shot would attest. Yet, Davis also proved that less is more. The physical monsters appear very little in this second episode, yet their pervasive, controlling presence is everywhere, thanks to some outstanding sound design. Contrast the insidious whispering voice that successfully turns Ben against his TARDIS compatriots to the shrill, raving shouts of "Macra do not exist" that emanate from Control whenever a hint of challenge to its authority is suggested. Returning this episode would also, I hope, confirm how Medoc's conditioning scene in the hospital was visualised on screen. In the recent animated version of the story, Medoc is simply shown strapped to a chair while the brainwashing lights and sounds swirl around him. My memory is that Medoc was vertically strapped to a large wheel that constantly rotated him while the mind-altering techniques were being applied. Must have been quite unpleasant for the actor. Jeremy's recall is, I believe, correct, because I've spoken to John Davis and he recalls doing that even though it wasn't in the script. Another suggestion, I think, that John Davis was really giving us stuff beyond what we can interpret from what's on the printed page. So, yes, please, more Macra. So, while the Macra do not exist, some of you are willing them to, and an equal number would like to come face-to-face with the Faceless Ones, and this underrated adventure's final instalment. And the reason that this episode has done better than the rest of the story is pretty obvious, and summed up neatly by TV producer Simon Harries. Ben and Polly's departure, says Simon, seems like a useful recovery, and presumably some footage of the aliens in the Faceless Ones. And yes, that's the end of the Faceless Ones, which until very late in the day looked like it was going to do very badly indeed. Episode 6 gets placed this high because of the number of people who made it a policy to choose companion exits, even exits as perfunctory as Ben and Polly's. And as I mentioned last time, to see their real last hurrah, go and grab episode 2. But at least this way we get to see the chameleons, admired film cameraman Tony Imme's extensive photography around Gatwick car park, and Jamie without his Scottish accent. Now, neither of the latter were stipulated by voters, but they really should have been at some point, so I've said them. We also get a climax in which the Doctor arbitrates for peace rather than blowing everything up or dispatching things by death. The first inkling that co-writer Malcolm Hulke might be a more nuanced and distinctive voice than some of his contemporaries. Unlike the Space Pirates, though, it seems people think that The Faceless Ones is pretty well represented by its existing instalments. Who'd have thought we needed to see men in metal hats more than bobble-faced body horror aliens? Nurse Pinto, the screens! It's a three-way tie for joint 53rd place, and we're into double figures now, with 10.8% of the vote. Well done, everybody. It's The Crusade, Episode 2, The Night of Jaffa, The Highlanders, Episode 2, and Evil of the Daleks, Episode 5. So it's the first of the two missing instalments of The Crusade to pop up here, rather healthily, and it's been chosen mostly because people want to see the story complete, although specifiers of this particular instalment are certainly tickled by the idea of Ian Chesterton getting knighted. Podcaster Kenny Smith says, "I love this. Clever, witty, brilliant storytelling. I have no idea why I disliked the story so much when the Hartnell years came out and Episode 3 featured on it." And indeed, it's a story as a whole that has a lot of people, including animator Martin Geraghty, extolling its virtues. "What we already have is so gorgeous and well acted," says Martin. Christopher Meredith was one of the few who chose this instalment, but not the fourth, because, he says, it'd be nice to see the film scenes at the end of the episode. Also, more Julian Glover, more Bernard Kay, and more Jean Marsh can't hurt. Also, more of the recently departed Tony Caunter playing, as you've often described him, Toby, the thieving opportunist called Thatcher. Yeah, well, I would, wouldn't I? As Christopher mentions, Jean Marsh pops up in this as Joanna. It's her debut in the story. In fact, she's only in 2 episodes of The Crusade, which is odd because she makes such an impact. So will it be possible here to get a hint of the incestuousness between her and Richard in the lengthy scene between them here? Because that's something that was apparently suggested in earlier drafts of the script and that the actors tried to play about with. So it'll be interesting to see what we might pick up in their interactions between two marvellous actors. We also see a couple of thesps from Marco Polo, who are only in this episode and have been unlucky to have been totally purged from the Who archives. Legendary Indian actress Zora Segal, who lived to be 102, is here playing Shayra. She was also a non-speaking artiste, but a prominent one in Marco Polo, and her helper for Xenia Merton for her monologue, her performed monologue in 500 Eyes. But Zora Segal was a legendary figure, and she's in this, but no other episode of The Crusade. Ditto Hungarian emigre actor Gabor Baraka, who was previously also in Marco Polo as Wang Lo, but here he plays dodgy merchant Luigi Ferrigo. It's a beautiful story, this, elegantly written. In cricket, a Jaffa is a very good ball that's very hard to hit. Well, The Night of Jaffa is a very good episode. It's very hard not to miss. Talking of episode 2s, we have the second part of another historical here, The Highlanders. Radio Times writer Patrick Mulcairn chose this one. It's a really good episode for Annika, as Polly gets the better of Lieutenant Finch and emboldens her new friend, Kirsty. We get a bit of Fraser Hines as Jamie, who actually has very little to do in his first story, says Patrick, and there's a hilarious scene where Troughton dupes Gray and Perkins. Matt Foy echoes the last sentiment in Patrick's comments there, choosing this instalment for Troughton monkeying around and his early performance. Now, Troughton does indeed get a great scene in which he bangs wheedling factotum Perkins' head on the desk whilst, as batty German Dr. von Wehr, convincing the man that he has a headache. It's a funny scene on the surface, but one that's quite alarming if you give it the remotest scrutiny. But hey, that's comedy sometimes. This one also has some welcome night filming, some realistically dingy environs thanks to the prison cell, and a fair amount of genuine water, which always adds an extra dimension. Oh, and we meet Captain Trask, who brings a few extra dimensions all of his own, doesn't he, my hearties? Arr, etc. A rarely mentioned historical, though, is doing well to share cupboard space with an acknowledged classic, but Episode 5 of Evil of the Daleks is its lowest place instalment, rubbing shoulders here with the Highlanders, despite having the intriguing, almost meta Daleks playing trains cliffhanger. Perhaps this is where the Victorian set subplot goes on just a little too long and people are keener to skip to Skaro, but it's a sign of what a good story this is, Evil. That it's an episode that begins with a Dalek getting chucked off a staircase on film, on location, in W.S. Gilbert's actual house. It features Jamie's first meeting with Victoria, and it's got one of Hines and Troughton's very best scenes in which Jamie rounds on the Doctor for his apparent callousness and tells him that they are finished. It's strong stuff, and it's extremely well done by our leads. Well, and then there's that cliffhanger. So, if this is the weakest episode of Evil, with only one person who didn't vote for the whole thing selecting it, American viewer Joe Llewellyn, actually, who also picked 6 and 7, he wants a big run-up to the final end, then yes, it's no wonder so many people actually want the whole thing back. And now we're into the top 50, and joint 49th place, with 11.7% of the votes, it's The Evil of the Daleks, this time, Episode 3. The Macra Terror, Episode 3. The Invasion, Episode 4. And The Space Pirates, Episode 5. So, just one place above Episode 5 of Evil, it's Episode 3 of the same story. So why was this one chosen? Well, Paul Venezis seems to have done so almost at random, picking this and Episode 7 in order that we at least get us some way to understanding more about the story, and we get to see more of Victoria and the conclusion. Whilst only one other person voted for it solo, its other advocates wanted the whole thing back, and this was just swept up in the net. This is an instalment with a bit of everything. The plot and characters really kick off, and we meet Arthur Terrell and Kemmel, who is played by Ice Warrior stalwart Sonny Caldinez, and Jamie is co-opted into the Daleks experiment, which involves some lovely nighttime filming on location. Oh, and we get to see Windsor Davis's performance as Toby. He's in the extant episode too, but doesn't say anything, and the rest of his performance is currently lost. Oh dear me, how sad. Well, not anymore, if you have your say, although I would have been less surprised had Evil 3 been one place lower than Evil 5 than the other way round as it is here, but here we go. As for the Macra Terror, Episode 3, the warlike, or war sound-alike, Jonathan Carley says, Episode 3 is probably the most tense of the serial, as the tension builds up and the mask slips of the utopian society. If the Macra Terror did turn up in its entirety, I'm sure the biggest criticism would probably be of the Macra themselves, which infamously weren't very practical. At least Episode 3 makes a virtue of that by having them lurk in the shadows. Macra 3 has a lot of scenes in the tunnels, and two characters, the Controller and Medoc, are seen getting pulled off by giant claws, quiet at the back, whilst Michael Craze gives us Ben under the control of the crabs, yes, quieter at the back, and the Doctor has lots of fun chalking equations onto a wall and marking himself 10 out of 10. Oh, it's a great story for fans of anarchist Troughton, is Macra. Surprisingly, it's the action-packed missing episode of The Invasion that is its least popular. But for a story that mostly exists, this cyber classic has done pretty well, with a whole host of you wanting both episodes returned, but an extra 3 just wanting this one, largely for the helicopter rescue. Jonathan Carley, we gave Douglas Camfield access to a helicopter, and we lost it, the episode, not the helicopter. That escape sequence would have been something special. Other than that, though, there isn't much in this instalment that we don't already have, so that proves that having a lot of a story is not necessarily a barrier to a number of people wanting even more of it, if it's a story that they like. But now to something, or someone, that we famously don't have anything of. Domisigri, is well renowned for being one of those Doctor Who characters for whom we have no photographic evidence. He's not the only one, as was the received wisdom for some time, but he's perhaps the most high profile, with the possible exception of Barry Ingham's Paris in The Mythmakers, and we do have a picture of him, but just not without his helmet. Oh, right, can everyone at the back just go away now? Esmond Knight was a very well-known and well-appreciated actor, and he gets very high billing in the episode publicity for what is essentially a doddery old man role. But no one thought to get a picture of him on set. Everyone had pretty much given up on the Space Pirates by then. And so many of you decided that we needed some more of him, including Matt Foy, who chose episode 5 of the Space Pirates because, well, I have to choose Dom Sigri, says Matt, to keep Toby happy, as he found these 7 episodes for me, as if I somehow have a reputation for wanting to hoover up unknown arcana. Me? With my reputation? The very thought. I spend my spare time at discos with hundreds of girls, don't you know? But Matt isn't alone in his reasoning, with many just putting those 2 words, Dom Isigri, as the reason for choosing this one. And a lot of people actually chose episodes 5 and 6 as a pair. But Dylan Reese went one further, choosing episodes 4, 5 and 6 of the Space Pirates because the plot really heats up here, and I think there are some great performances. Plus, I want to see the planet Tar, Cavern Study, and, you guessed it, Dom Isigri. It just goes to show that if a publicity picture taker had decided to visit the Space Pirates after episode 1, it might have done less well in this poll. Although it doubtless benefits from the ill health of telesnap taker John Cura, who sadly died just 2 weeks after the final episodes of it aired, but by this time he'd stopped taking his telesnap pictures. Comedian Tom Burgess chose Space Pirates 5, and as we are pretty much close to halfway through the countdown, let's hear from him, because A, he's very funny and very perceptive, and B, because it breaks up me a little bit, which can only be a relief. Over to Tom, whose character Peter Fleming, a TV producer from the golden age of television, should be right up your street if you're listening to this, so do check him out. He's got a podcast and he does live work too. He's excellent.
Hello, Toby and friends. It is Tom Burgess here, comedian and creator of the Lost TV-inspired comedy character Peter Fleming. Peter stems from my own fascination with the missing episodes of Doctor Who, going back to the age of about 7 or 8, which is when I first watched Cybermen the early years in the late 90s. So I was delighted to be challenged with your, I hope you don't mind me saying, Toby, horrible thought experiment to play Desert Island Docks and save 17 final episodes from the abyss. I've tried to pick a good spread alongside my highest priorities, but there are some losers, and I'm just making the proviso now that it's painful not to have them too. But there we go. So my first choice is 500 Eyes, the 3rd episode of Marco Polo. This contains my 2 favourite moments from the story, going back to whenever it was I first listened to the CD. Ian teaches Marco Polo about condensation, which I think is a lovely reminder of the show's original educational remit. I think there is something that feels incredibly innocent about it, and I think it's charming, and I would love to have it back. I would also love the sequence where Ping Cho tells a story to the camp, because the music cue underneath that is so beautiful, and I'd love to hear it in better quality. Tristram Carey's score is, I think, the only one of his for Doctor Who that we don't have. So to be able to hear some more of it in a better state, I think it would draw people's attention to it. In the same way I think happened with Web of Fear. When that came back, a lot of people became aware of how good the soundtrack for it was. So I hope the same will happen there. The same is probably true also, actually, of my next pick, The Night of Jaffa, episode 2 of The Crusade. Lovely early Dudley Simpson. But also, the moment I really want from this is Ian getting knighted. It seems bizarre, really, that this moment of his story in Doctor Who is missing. I think if it had been there all along in the archives, it would be talked about quite often. It's a big talking point in his story, and we just kind of miss it. So to actually see that happen, I think, would be fantastic. And also the lengthy action sequence at the end. I imagine I'm not the only person who listened to their CD that came with the VHS of The Crusade in the Space Museum, and the last couple of minutes thinking, I really wish I could see this. There's no dialogue. And I know from the photo galleries on the Blu-rays that a lot of effort was put into shooting this. It probably looked fantastic because it's Douglas Camfield, so I would love to see that. My next pick is Mission to the Unknown, a complete oddity for Doctor Who, but I have such fond memories of listening to this one when I first bought the CDs of this from Llangollen, and I thought it was just incredible how grim it was, and so weird for the Doctor just not to be there. So I would love to see that, and I would love to see the delegates in their first form. My next pick, and we are now into a big run from season 3, is Small Profit, Quick Return, the second episode of The Mythmakers. I've largely picked this for one scene. I'd happily have any of Mythmakers back, but I would love to see Paris, played by Barringham from Doctor Who and the Daleks, trying to get out of a fight with Stephen, who in character is flinging insult after him, and all he can say back is, yes, well, I'm prepared to overlook that. I think it's a fantastic moment, and I would love to see that. Now we are into Dalek's Master Plan. I've picked quite a few from this one, and that was difficult. I'm sorry, Volcano, you haven't made it. But I have picked The Traitors, purely because I want to see Adrian Hill suffocate, and I want to see Nicholas Courtney get shot. Deal with it. Next up, I have The Abandoned Planet, episode 11. More delegates, slightly recast. I would like to see Terence Woodfield as Salation because his weird, hissy performance really grabbed my imagination when I was a kid, and I would love to see what that actually looks like. It's also such a weird episode for William Hartnell just vanishing so early on with basically no explanation. It just adds to the sense of foreboding. It's a really weirdly unsettling episode of Doctor Who, in a kind of unspoken way. But it leads on to my top priority, probably the same for a lot of people, Destruction of Time, episode 12. Mavic Chen being exterminated. I'd love to see the look on his face. I would love to see the horrifying last few minutes. I think it must be an absolutely astonishing watch. This used to be my second most wanted, but then my top pick, Web of Fear episode 4, turned up. And that one was even better than I was hoping. So I've just got a good feeling about this one. Next up, we have Bell of Doom, the final episode of The Massacre. I'm sure other people will be talking about Hartnell's monologue at the end and Dodo turning up. Obviously, I want those. But primarily, I just want to see Andre Morell in Doctor Who. And I know you do too, Toby. Of course you do. It's Quatermass in Doctor Who, the love child of your two main interests. My next pick, I'm sorry, The Savages, you haven't made it. But I have picked a different, entirely missing story with a hefty location shoot, and I've picked The Smugglers, episode 1. I would have loved to pick The Savages, but we've got Stephen leaving on 8mm anyway, so come on, we're fine. We've got plenty of Stephen. He's better in The Massacre anyway. The Smugglers, I think, is fun because it is a taste of that boys' own adventure style of historical that Innes Lloyd and Jerry Davis brought in. But I'd love to see the use of the location, and I would also love it because it is the season launch of Doctor Who, season 4. So I would like to see Ben and Polly's first reactions to the TARDIS and William Hartnell telling them, yes, this is basically the show, so enjoy it, because I'm off in a couple of weeks, so it's going to be yours now. So I'd love to see that. My next two picks, which kind of go together, I suppose, 10th Planet episode 4 and Power of the Daleks episode 1. There's no reason I've picked those, really, just random. So the next pick I have is episode 3 of The Highlanders. Again, it's another taste of that style of historical that came in with The Smugglers. But crucially, I would love to see Troughton in drag. And the next pick I have is also Troughton wardrobe related. I would like episode 1 of the Macra Terror. I'd like to see a bit more of the Macra, not that we see loads. I would like to see a bit of Peter Jeffrey, but most of all, I would like to see the rough and tumble machine where Troughton gets made neat and tidy and then jumps back into the machine and gets roughed up again. Well, it's a different machine, but you know what I mean. Next up, we have another run of 2 consecutives. Evil of the Daleks, episode 6. I love the childlike Daleks at the start. I think it's an incredible idea, and to see that play out, I think would be fascinating. It's also the other transitional episode of the story. We have episode 2 where we go from London to Victorian times. I'd like to see going from Victorian London to Skaro as well. And I think, for my money, it might be my favourite cliffhanger of the 60s. I'll probably think of a different one and go, no, that's better. But I love Troughton realising that he's been played all along. And there's a telesnap of his face, which must be the final shot of the episode. And it's just Troughton's face. I want more of his face. So, Evil of the Daleks, episode 7. It feels like Doctor Who's first proper season finale. And quite apart from all of the amazing moments that happen in it, I would love to be able to watch Smugglers episode 1 and then go straight to Evil of the Daleks episode 7 and just reflect on what an enormous year of change this was for Doctor Who. Probably the most significant in the whole run of the show. It's why it's so tragic that we don't have really any of it. 2 to go. So I've got 1 from season 5, 1 from season 6. I've picked from season 5 Fury from the Deep episode 3. I would like to see a bit of interior TARDIS action as they analyse the weed, but what I would really like is the cliffhanger of Maggie Harris walking into the sea. It's another top cliffhanger of mine. And we do also have the pleasing fact of, if this came back, then we would have moving footage from each episode of the story. I know the stuff that we have from episode 6 was basically alternate shots, so it wasn't technically used, but it counts. And my final pick is episode 5 of The Space Pirates. I think I could have picked any late episode from this one, but I'd like to see places and characters we don't have a visual record of. I'd also like to see Zoe not knowing what candles are, purely for the irritating inconsistency with the mind dropper that would draw attention to. But I think it would bring some small reprieve around for the Space Pirates. Like Enemy of the World, we have a rather uneventful episode that exists. And like Enemy of the World, that sent me to sleep when I watched the Troughton Years. And like Enemy of the World, I think more people would like the Space Pirates if we could see more of it. People talk about the power of Kroll as a dummy run for Caves of Androzani. I actually think this is more of one. Loads of elements match up. And obviously Androzani does it better, but this is a really fascinating first draft. So those are my picks. Again, I can only apologise to the Savages. And Fury from the Deep 6, Wheel in Space 1, Volcano, loads. But whatever might come back in real life in the future, we know from Galaxy 4 and the Underwater Menace that there are magic moments in even the most underestimated episode of Doctor Who, like the Space Pirates. But pretty much as long as I've loved Doctor Who, I've been spellbound by the legend of these missing episodes, and like a lot of people, I think often sustained by the hope of more coming back. Over the course of my fandom, I've had sufficient internet access to find out about the last 3 recoveries at the time, starting with Day of Armageddon. And even with passing age, the thrill at something coming back, it connects directly with that excitable 12-year-old part of my brain. So I know whatever happens next is going to have just the same effect, and I can't wait. But I must, so I will. Thank you for giving me this chance to occupy myself in the meantime, and it would be remiss of me not to point listeners towards my own missing episodes-inspired comedy podcast series, Into the Archives with Peter Fleming, if, listener, you are looking for more time to fill while you're waiting. It's rich with Doctor Who and archive telly in-jokes. Another run of episodes is on the way soon, and it's available from all good podcast platforms, and I think quite a lot of bad ones too. So that's Into the Archives with Peter Fleming. Please look it up, and thank you, Toby.
Thanks, Tom. Good reasoning, and as I say, nice to have a break just past the hour mark from my rambling. Anyway, on with the motley. And we are well into the top half now, and it's a right lovely pair of openers in joint 47th place with 12.6% of the vote. The Daleks' Master Plan, Episode 1, The Nightmare Begins, and The Invasion, Episode 1. The Daleks' Master Plan knew it was an epic from the outset. The Nightmare Begins, indeed, and it's a cracking episode, which would give us much joy. It's an introduction not only to the story, but to its villain, Marvick Chen, played by the masterful Kevin Stoney, surely one of the greatest Who adversaries of all time, and it's such an impressive, inventive, cruelly charming performance. Oh, chef's kiss, Mr. Stoney. It has the underrepresented Katerina in it too, this episode, and it would solve the most vexing mystery of exactly when Stephen changes from his Trojan gear from the previous story to his space corduroy. It also gives us a lovely glimpse of future Earth that has a rather proto-Blake 7 feel about it, with its telecasts and its commentators and its air of bleakness. It also has TV legend Brian Cant playing away from his usual fare as injured space agent Kurt Gantry. Now, we do have some of his final moments on film, but as there was an internal complaint at the time about his studio facial hair not matching his pre-filmed whiskers, there's even a goof for us to anticipate, if we like that sort of thing. I don't, but I do, but I wish I didn't, and kind of hate myself for doing so, which I do, even though I like to think of myself as someone who doesn't. And it's the first appearance of Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart, actor Nicholas Courtney in Doctor Who, here playing tough guy space agent Brett Vian. So it's not just the nightmare that begins here, but something of a legend does too. Can I just note at this point that I meant to write just a line or two about each episode, and the reason I'm not is because as I'm doing this, I'm becoming, once again, absolutely steeped in love for every single man-jack of them. Every single instalment of Doctor Who has something to talk about. So I'm sorry this has got longer, except I'm not. This episode was among those chosen by Paul Vanezis, who could only find space for 4 Master Plan episodes in his haul. I think it's a fabulous, overlong adventure, said Paul. These new pieces would almost make sense of it as a story. Paul also chose part 6, 11 and 12. And we get to see more of Kevin Stoney and William Hartnell arguably at his best under Douglas Camfield's direction. And Douglas Camfield is also behind the camera as we complete The Invasion, with episode 1 finally turning up here. I say finally, as this was long rumoured to exist as a mute print when I was a lad. Let's not get into the whys and wherefores of that now, but anyway, interestingly, this slow build-up of an episode is one that beats its missing bedfellow, part 4, which has helicopters and a Cyberman in the cliffhanger and everything, but it seems to be that it's the atmosphere that clinches it for this one, as Christopher Meredith tells us it is slightly reminiscent of one of my favourite BBC dramas, Edge of Darkness. As a sidebar, Edge of Darkness is currently showing on BBC 4, and if you haven't seen it, well, you really should. And it's got the recently departed Charles Kay, Joe Don Baker, and Doctor Who's very own Marshal, John Woodvine, all in it, so it's something of a valedictory shindig right now as well. But no, I noticed a friend of mine who knows his stuff put on Twitter the other day that he'd never actually seen it. So if you are among that number, go and check out Edge of Darkness. It's great. It's nearly as good as The Invasion Episode 1. The Invasion Episode 1 also features a performance that we don't have anything of picture-wise, that of Murray Evans as the unit operative bus driver. We only have a couple of photographs of him, and they're actually used in the next episode, but we don't have any of footage of him in this one interacting with the TARDIS crew. And dear old Murray also died earlier this year, but I know his family would love to see him in action. Alistair McGowan also chose The Invasion Part 1, but not number 4, on account of it being more spy thrillery than the later instalment. Oh, and that man Camfield, well, he's actually in this one, cameoing as a driver who gives the hitchhiking TARDIS team a lift, so it'd be nice to have his Hitchcock moment. Oh, as well as the very first appearance of John Levine as Benton, which nobody has actually cited as a reason, and I say often people choose the first appearance of a companion, but maybe we take Benton a little bit for granted. But I'd like to mark his debut here because, frankly, our lives would be less colourful without a bit of Benton and without a bit of John Levine in our lives. Coming in at joint 44th place with 13.5% of the vote, we have a motley crew. We have The Crusade, Episode 4, The Warlords, The Smugglers, Episode 4, and Fury from the Deep, Episode 1. And so The Crusade, the dusty historical, has outdone The Invasion, the funky army shoot-'em-up, which it tied with in terms of stories that you wanted completed. But now The Invasion, just ahead in the individual episode stakes, is another whole story that bows out here. It's a highly regarded one that some people think we have plenty of already, but some people, they still really want to complete. It's quite an odd denouement, really, to the story, The Warlords. Saladin isn't in it, nor is Joanna, and Richard the Lionheart, well, he only has one scene, but that hasn't stopped Dylan Reese choosing it. "I love this story," he says. "It's a brilliant cast and has beautiful dialogue, so I just need more of it in my life." Well, the eye should have contentment where it rests, Dylan. As for Philip Marsh, he chose this but not Episode 2. I'm mostly spreading these episodes around rather than completing stories, but I think The Crusade would be an all-time classic if we had all of it. If I had 18 episodes to choose from, I'd have added Episode 2 as well. There are plenty of new characters in this final instalment, including the harem, which means there are plenty of female faces on show, plus the famous ants in honey on Ian's hand scene, which also features the animal carcass that apparently stunk out the studio. Oh, and Tati Lemko Klaxon as the actor who specialises in playing lively foreign ne'er-do-wells here turns up to play a lively foreign ne'er-do-well. But, you know, he does do a ne'er-do-well well. And talking of concluding episodes of historicals, and indeed ne'er-do-wells, well, it's only The Smugglers Part 4. For Jason Thompson, it's another one I feel the visuals might make more sense of, a very shouty and noisy conclusion. Designer Phil Newman has chosen it for the climax and the ominous next story caption. Yep. Sometimes a caption, this one saying, "Next week, the 10th planet," is enough to propel an episode into our most wanted, and there's nought wrong with that. For Peter Ware, I bet the location work for this one looked stunning. Yeah, well, and there's plenty of it. Lots of scenes on the Cornish beach here. In the studio, it's pretty packed too, with a fair amount of fighting. And who knows if we will be able to spot the actor Hugh Fraser, now one of our most recognisable character turns, Captain Hastings in Poirot, no less, who makes an uncredited appearance here among the cutlasses. And we're off to the seaside again, but for a very different adventure, with Fury from the Deep, Episode 1. Which famously features the debut of the sonic screwdriver, the appearance of which has caused some debate. The received wisdom currently is that the prop went missing on location, so Troughton improvised using a whistle. Well, whatever form it takes, it'd be nice to actually have this momentous moment. Richard Smith has chosen the screwdriver, the beach, and the floating TARDIS as his reasons for wanting this episode, and not one of the other Fury instalments back. A few people seem to have gone for it because they can't afford the whole story, so bagged its opening and closing instalments. Well, if it is in a cupboard somewhere, I don't care if you use a screwdriver or a whistle. Just open it up. I'm sure it's a gas. And in 43rd place, with 14.4% of the vote, well, it's a gas. That was 5, wasn't it? Yeah, it's more of the same. It's Fury from the Deep, Episode 5. So what do we have here? Well, the comeuppance of Messrs. Oakenquill, Robson kidnapping Victoria, and the final confrontation on the rig. So there's going to be plenty going on in this episode. And for listener Paul Goodridge, this is better than the more popular Episode 6. Of this penultimate instalment, Paul says, everything is coming to a climax. Too much of 6 is spent mucking about in a helicopter for it to feel essential. And a few of you chose 5 and 6, maybe for that reason. That climax, whilst necessary, isn't perhaps as representative of the story itself as this penultimate episode. And so on we go to what 15.3% of you voted in at number 42, the meaning of life, the universe, everything, and, well, the human factor, because it's Evil of the Daleks, episode 4. Now, this is interesting, because Evil 4 is one of the middle instalments, which Evil of the Daleks' few critics point to as the ones which might dent its reputation, should ever we get to see it. It treads water a bit, they say. And this one, well, Patrick Troughton's on holiday. I mean, he's in it, pre-recorded his scenes on film, you see, but he's set apart from the action. And actually, some people chose this, Troughton only being on film this week, as their actual reason for alighting upon this instalment, weirdly. So basically, there's a group of people out there who get their kicks from seeing their regular actors in a slightly shinier medium to the one we're used to capturing them in, and to how the rest of the episode is represented. And people think we're weird. There's also a huge chunk of filmed action featuring Jamie and Kemmel fighting, which isn't described in the script and is barely represented by the telesnaps. So getting this back would fill in lots of those kind of gaps and see how the excellent director Derek Martinez went to town on these action sequences. As Stephen Shapansky from Radio Free Skaro puts it, Troughton is on film, and the action sequences between Jamie and Kemmel are tough to imagine just listening to the audio recording. And Christopher Meredith chose this one over episode 7 because he wants to see the film sequences at Grimsdyke House. Property porn, basically. And with that, we enter the top 40. And you've got Grand Designs on joint 40th place. With 16.2% of the vote, it's The Massacre 2, The Sea Beggar, and Fury from the Deep, episode 3. Oh, it's a pair of belters. The Sea Beggar is the lowest placed episode of The Massacre. And that's a very popular story these days, but to be frank, it could have been placed even lower. You see, a couple of people actually voted for this instalment because they wanted to see William Hartnell playing the Abbot. However, I think you'll find he only does so in this episode in the reprise from episode 1 and in a short film sequence in which he doesn't speak. His Abbot performance is really only in episode 3. But it just goes to show in how little detail even lovers of this quite obscure story know it. Because it really is one of the murkiest entries into the canon, really. Few photos, no telesnaps, dodgy soundtrack, title everyone gets wrong. This is a great episode, though. Leonard Sachs and Andre Morell make their debuts, Professor Quatermass in Doctor Who, and the former gets to do the cliffhanger, in which he reveals that he is the eponymous Sea Beggar, which, unbeknownst to him, is really bad news, as everyone else spends the whole episode talking about bumping the Sea Beggar off. It's one of the show's best different episode endings in a story that is thoughtful and character-driven. From the Sea Beggar to the Seaweed in Fury from the Deep, episode 3, which was chosen by, among others, Patrick Mulkern. A great episode, he says. The Doctor, Jamie and Victoria together being attacked by weed and foam in the Harris' living quarters. Then a curious scene with them back in the TARDIS later. Robson losing his mind and being attacked by the weed. Then the final scene on the beach with Robson and Maggie under control. Hugh David described to me in detail the difficulty of filming the actress June Murphy walking into the sea and submerging herself. Filmed in February. Bruh. Jeremy Bentham says, nobody actually dies in this story, and yet it's loaded from start to finish with dive behind the sofa moments that fill the viewer with growing sensations of dread and menace. And there are so many of them. Almost as though Victor Pemberton, Peter Bryant and director Hugh David were vying for who could contrive the next blood-curdling set-piece. Even the incidental music does its bit, promoting a mood of unease and threat throughout. Selecting just one representative episode is thus quite difficult, but I think for me the scares and jolts come thickest and fastest in part 3. Culminating in that quite unearthly moment on the seashore when the weed-infected Maggie Harris calmly strides out into the water and just keeps going until her head and body submerge from view beneath the rolling waves. It's absolutely chilling in every sense of the word. For producer Simon Harries, the seaweed creature's attack is the highlight, whilst Christopher Meredith wants more foam, more John Abineri. But it's the cliffhanger that certainly seems to have tipped the balance in favour of this instalment, which is the story's most popular, bar the climax. But I wonder too if that is because we don't have any censor clips from it, like we do from episodes 2, 4 and 5. Right, giddy up, we'll be here all day otherwise. We're cantering to joint 38th place with 17.1%. And who's that trotting up? It's Marco Polo 5's Rider from Shang 2 and The Evil of the Daleks, Episode 1. Bar 1, the only votes that Marco Polo, Episode 5, Rider from Shang 2 got were from people who wanted all of Marco Polo back. Only one person out of all of you, most of you chose 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4 or 5 episodes of that story, but only one person singled this one out as the one that had something that marked it out for preservation. A shame it's so comparatively unloved, as it introduces a key character, Paul Carson's Ling Tao, and it has some lovely stuff about how the riders conducted their business, which is fascinating Reithian content. The episode's sole advocate was designer Phil Newman. Difficult to pick just one episode, says Phil of Marco Polo, but this has Susan and Ping Cho with some nice character stuff, and indeed the relationship between those young women is beautifully written and played. But other instalments of Marco Polo are available, and they bring with them more alluring one-off content, as we shall see. In contrast, The Evil of the Daleks does have unique selling points that were enough for many of you to single it out. Hines and Troughton in the 60s. Yeah, although he spends the whole of the Faceless ones in the 60s, he's at an airport, whereas this takes him out and about and has a soundtrack bedeviling cameo from a Beatles song in the coffee bar, the Tricolore, that they go to, plus an ominous moment in that establishment when the music fades as the Doctor indicates that he can sense the powerful nature of the enemy they're about to face. It's very self-consciously an epic, and all the better for it. We also get a fair bit of film in this one as the TARDIS is stolen and the Doctor and Jamie are stalked, and we have notable single episode characters Kennedy and Bob Hall, the latter played by Alec Ross, who at the time was married to future Doctor Who A-lister, that's Helen A-lister, Sheila Hancock. Evil One also benefits from the general bias to opening and closing instalments, which certainly thrive in this poll. But there is, to be fair, no other episode quite like it. And at 37th place, with 18.7% of the vote, it's The Abominable Snowmen, Episode 6. It's nice that a story, due to being an early Target book, that was once quite prominent, well-known, and talked about a lot, but is now rather ignored, almost like having Episode 2 is enough for everyone, does at least have one instalment that gets a decent whack of the tally. No surprises then that it's the climactic episode. And what a thrilling climax it is. And one of its advocates is a man of great Who intelligence, Richard Bignell. The evidence suggests that, as shot, says Richard, Padmasambhavar's original demise was rather more graphic than what ended up in the transmitted version. So it would be very interesting to see how this appeared on screen and how they edited it. Are there any traces of what was originally shot left over? The existing telesnaps provide no real clues to this. Now, Richard is referring to the fact that it was planned to melt Padmasambhavar's face, a la Cain in Dragonfire, and this was apparently cut. And yet, before we learnt this information about the plans for the melting face, a man I used to know who watched at the time swore blind that Padmasambhavar did melt. He really wanted to see this episode. Now, how would he have known that? How would he have known that the melting was even an option when we didn't know that? It wasn't part of the history as written up yet. So that's intriguing, and that alone, I think, is a mystery worth finding the episode for, I'd say. Do we see melty-face Padmasambhavar? But we do have more reasons. Lee Wood chose this for that scene where the Doctor screams, as I think that would be chillingly directed, and I thought was underplayed or thrown away a bit in the otherwise excellent animation. He's right, there is indeed a quite perilous cry from Troughton, who sounds at his most vulnerable here. The Abominable Snowman actually, I would say, has a similar edge to the Web of Fear, but it's not often credited for possessing it, partially because I think we've been misdirected by the relatively cosier episode 2, and it's not all modern day and military and Camfield. But anyway, talking of cosy, Leighton Haberfield has voted for this because he wants to see, and I quote, the little Yeti at the end. Because, of course, yes, we see your actual Abominable Snowmen, not your robot servant of the Great Intelligence. And that is where we must leave the Abominable Snowmen, as this is its peak. Not quite Everest, perhaps, but I bet if this did turn up, its reputation would improve. I mean, its standing has actually improved during the course of this podcast, between episodes, appropriate for a mythical creature that some of my sightings of the Abominable Snowmen were incorrect. So the story I'm surprised hadn't done better actually had done better, even though practically everyone who voted for it was in the last batch of tallies to be sent in. Talking of reputations, there's no episode that is considered quite in the same way as this one, and it's appropriate that it's on its own, in 36th place, with 19.8% of the vote. Well, incidentally, it's only The Daleks' Master Plan, Episode 7, The Feast of Stephen. The only Christmas special of the classic series. This is the one most of you think will never turn up, and so declared it wishful thinking, even as you handed the car boot seller your cash. Now, whilst it has its supporters, it is also a very divisive episode, with some laboured comedy, some of it inexplicable, and of course none of the elements that make the Daleks' Master Plan such a compelling adventure, as the Pepper Potts and Kevin Stoney have a week off. But for such a one-off, it might have been expected to do better just for rarity value alone. And even some of those voting for it acknowledged that it's probably, despite the high quotient of police action of the Liverpool and Keystone kind, the episode not actually being much cop. So no one voting for this was minding the quality, they were feeling the width, because there's a lot to unravel herein. Mysteries to solve here. Is Ingmar Knirpf really played by actor Mark Rose, for whom we have a trail, and not Mark Ross, who it is according to the cast list and the Radio Times, but yet I've not found evidence of a Mark Ross in the acting profession at this time anywhere. He doesn't appear to have done anything else, whereas Mark Rose has. Typo? I think so, but we need to have a proper look at him to be sure, because I have found photos of him elsewhere. And what is the joke with the reveal of Professor Webster, played by Albert Barrington, an actor we don't have a photograph of, who appears to have been Douglas Camfield's neighbour? He was not a member of Equity, he didn't advertise in Spotlight, so we don't have any visual of him at all. And such a thing might help to explain what the joke in the character's visual reveal is, because we can't really guess. Did he look a bit like William Hartnell? Is he dressed like William Hartnell? There was a rumour it was actually William Hartnell, but it's not, because Albert Barrington is in an episode of Z-Cars, directed by Douglas Camfield. So there's lots of things that would be cleared up, or at least illuminated. Now, this episode was definitely a favourite choice for some prominent contributors. In Canada, it must now be known as the Feast of Stephen Shapansky, who picked it because I want all of our preconceptions about how many film copies of episodes were made to be shattered. Oh, nice one, Stephen. If this exists, is his reasoning, then technically anything could, and anywhere, because the general thought is that this wasn't even telerecorded for sale. But there is a thought that it might have been telerecorded for internal viewing purposes. So again, we just don't know. And as they're all missing, they may as well all be as missing as each other. For DWM's Peter Ware, it's another obvious one. Imagine what it would be like to actually see the chaos in the Hollywood film studio and to know what Professor Webster looked like. All directed by Douglas Camfield. Whilst Simon Guerrier says, it's mad, but did Douglas Camfield make it work? Douglas Camfield is often mentioned when referring to his missing episodes because he really is the key to success. as far as a lot of his stories are concerned. Documentary maker Richard Latto wants the Feast of Stephen because it's so unlikely to turn up, and I think if I saw the whole breaking the fourth wall scene, I'd need wiping down after the excitement. Good Lord, Latto, really? Calm yourself, it's Christmas. Listener Jason Thompson describes it, somewhat more tastefully than Richard, as unique, and both wonderful and awful in equal measure. How can we not want Doctor Who's first Christmas episode back? And visuals might make the cacophony of overlapping voices in the film set parts easier to follow. Yeah, the soundtrack is a bit of a racket. Andrew Liddell has no time for those of us worried about the lameness of the comedy. I bet it's a banger, he says. And what about someone who was there at the time? Oh yes, back to the early years writer Jeremy Bentham. Wisdom has it, says Jeremy, that this episode is the least likely to be found, even if all the other missing episodes miraculously turned up. It was only aired once in the UK, and from a master tape that would be quickly reused just weeks later. It was apparently never telerecorded onto film, and so never included in packages of programmes offered for sale to broadcasters in other countries. But hey, this is a wish list, and while some would argue the Feast of Stephen isn't proper Doctor Who, its first half is nonetheless very funny, its second half pure slapstick, and it does work as a bit of festive frippery, toasting a happy Christmas to nearly 8 million viewers eagerly watching at home on Christmas Day, 1965. In 1983, one of Heather Hartnell's grandsons, accompanying her to an event at the National Film Theatre, suggested William Hartnell had been gifted a 16mm film copy of this episode by the BBC, and that it was shown during Christmas Day parties for family members. This triggered a flurry of correspondence and phone calls with said grandson by episode hunter Richard Landon. Sadly, though, it transpired the assembled family had watched the Feast of Stephen, but only once, and that was during its sole UK broadcast. Oh, curses. And surely it has Doctor Who's first meta-joke, this episode, in which William Hartnell recognises the actor Reg Pritchard, here playing Man in Macintosh, whose joke has such a lame punchline, I refuse to entertain it here. He recognises him from the marketplace in Jaffa, where Pritchard did indeed play tradesman Ben Dahir in The Crusade. That's pretty avant-garde stuff for 1965, I venture, and definitely not a meta-crisis. Well, time to toast those in joint 33rd place now, because they've got just over 20% well done. It's The Daleks' Master Plan 11, The Abandoned Planet, The Power of the Daleks, Episode 3, and The Highlanders, Episode 1. From one of the most ridiculous episodes of The Daleks' Master Plan to one of its most sublime. Episode 11 is where the story proper, as established in the early instalments, is returned after some fannying about in Egypt. We're back on Kemble and even get to see a load of alien delegates, with Malfa now played by Alf Roberts off of Coronation Street, who is also in the Feast of Stevens, as it happens, but acting under a different name and playing a different part, which is another gorgeous curio. Why did William Hartnell disappear for most of this episode, asks Stephen Shapansky when demanding its return, though I'm not sure that finding it will ever give us an answer to that, Stephen, but he's right. It is quite a Dr. Light one. David Gillespie Pratt chose episode 11 along with episode 12 so that we can properly appreciate the story's climax. Alongside the extant episode 10, it'd be quite a run if we had both of them back. In fact, most people who chose 11 also chose 12, so these do come as a pair, really. So hopefully they're looking after each other out there, someone in Collectorsville. More Dalek action, but of a very different kind, and with a very different Doctor. It's the third instalment of The Power of the Daleks, which has the Metal Meanies on very conniving form. It's also a great showcase for its fledgling Doctor, causing chaos, standing up to the Daleks, and introducing a touch of anarchy to the colony on Vulcan. Oh, and he's got a hat like that, and wears it quite a lot this week. There's also a beguiling cliffhanger as the single-minded Lesterson briefly entertains a moment of doubt in regard to the Daleks he has so zealously advocated for. And what about The Highlanders Episode 1? Well, it has a lot of lovely film, which usually contains moments not covered in detail in the shooting script, and much of it takes place outside in the aftermath of the Battle of Culloden. I've been thinking a lot about The Highlanders recently, because it's not one I usually think about, and then I listened to the brilliant Missing Episodes podcast instalment on it, and it got me all excited about The Highlanders, which wasn't going to be in one of my choices. It was going to be one of the ones I left behind. Remember, I'm going to do my choices, which haven't counted towards the tally at the very end of the final part of this podcast. But the director Peter Watkins died the week that I'm recording this. He did an extraordinary drama documentary called The War Game that I urge you to see if you want to be scared forever. But he also did, in 1960, a film called Culloden, which purported to be reportage filmed on sort of 16mm newsreel as if it was entrenched in the battle. So it's very sort of instructive as to the background of the historical event that informs the Highlanders. And as Watkins died this week, I thought I'd give it a proper look. And it's an amazing piece of television. It has really nothing to do with this, apart from the fact that it's old telly and it's about a battle that's featured in a missing Doctor Who story. But I watched it last night and I liked it. And if you haven't, maybe you should. It's available on DVD and Blu-ray from the BFI. Also, do check out the Missing Episodes podcast on The Highlanders. It's got loads of fascinating insight, information and observations, and it just gets you in the mood. And there's nothing like getting in the mood for a missing episode, including this one that I've gone off piece talking about, The Highlanders Episode 1. What happens in it? Well, Patrick Troughton gets up to some hat-like-that business in it. It's also, as DWM's Peter Ware observes, Jamie's first appearance, and so Peter has chosen it because it would make Fraser so happy. Oh, bless you, Peter. I can think of worse reasons for choosing it, though. Although, and I hate to break it to Fraser, Jamie doesn't actually do or say very much in The Highlanders. He doesn't really pipe up until he joins the TARDIS crew, but, you know, small acorns and all that. And it'll be interesting to watch the character we know and love as he was at the beginning, slightly different. In at 32nd with 21% of the vote, so dizzy, 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 the Daleks' heads are spinning. It's only Evil of the Daleks, Episode 6. Now this is interesting because it seems to have been a tactical choice. A lot of people, you see, like the train's cliffhanger to Episode 5, which, as you'll recall, didn't do especially well. It was the lowest scoring episode of Evil of the Daleks, and yet it has that amazing scene in it. And many people want to see Skaro and the Emperor Dalek. So, if you're only going to choose one instalment from Evil of the Daleks, well, this has a bit from both worlds, and maybe helps to explain why Episode 5 suffered so. This feels like the story is reaching a climax, doesn't it? As the Victorian era is abandoned and the Doctor lands on Skaro for the first time since the Daleks' debut. Oh, it feels like a momentous moment, especially following the surreal and creepy playground Daleks, that distorted parody of innocent schoolyard fun. By synthesizing the metal fascists with childhood games, we get an unsettling, weird mockery of ubiquitous playtime antics, and the whole 25 minutes builds up to a cliffhanger that is a shocker, one where we come face to face with the Emperor Dalek. This feels like the show really coming to terms with its status as something with a history, something that can feed off itself to provide an awesome development. And that Emperor reveal, I mean, look at him, he's massive, and he even sounds earth-shattering. Well, it's an impressive visual, but Troughton also acts it with considerable clout. His reaction is so important to this very, very special scene. It's hairs on the back of the neck stuff. War Doctor Jonathan Carley, I suppose he should be Civil War Doctor Jonathan Carley, says, I was torn between 6 and 7. I'd love to compare the behind-the-scenes footage of the story's climax with what was actually broadcast, but ultimately, I think Episode 6 is the more interesting. Like Episode 2, it has a pivotal shift in location, and Maxtable's desperation, with a compelling performance from Marius Goring. Goring is probably the biggest name to appear in the show in its classic years, and the only actor to be paid more per episode than the show's leading man. So, this is epic stuff, folks. And a lot of people who chose this one also picked, unlike Jonathan, episode 7 as well. They want the whole of the final 50 minutes of this huge epic adventure. Into the top 30, and in equal 30th place, with over 22.5% of the vote, it's The Power of the Daleks, Episode 5, and The Macra Terror, Episode 1. As mentioned last week, even though the Macra Terror Episode 1 only affords us a glimpse of the giant crustacean lurking in the darkness of the Earth colony, it's an instalment that many of you want to see because of something missing even from our attempts to rescue it from oblivion. The scene in which the Doctor subjects himself to the rough and tumble machine in order to undo the pampering he didn't want in the first place. It's rather delightful, but it was deemed undoable on the animation, and so that's not good enough for a lot of you who want it back in. It also has a very distinctive opening that seems to have come very much from the imagination of the director John Davis, whose work, I think, will contain, as I've said before, a lot of visual surprises. Oh, and writer Eddie Robson alights upon an extremely serious observation in his advocacy of this one. He says, "It's a very important episode as it features Polly being given her superb pixie cut." Thanks, Eddie. We would also be a bit closer to working out if the actress Sandra Bryant, Kitty from the War Machines, is actually in this episode at all. She's credited as playing Cheeky, but that role is played by Carol Keyes in episode 4. Carol Keyes is actually also known as Luann Peters, who appears later in Frontier in Space. And there's a theory that Sandra Bryant may have dropped out of this one a bit too late for the roller caption to be changed. Hence a credit, but potentially no appearance. And before you ask, no, the shooting script does not help us here. So it's all theory at the moment. We need to see it to believe it. There may be no such thing as Sandra. Well, rather like the Macra prop, this podcast has become rather more unwieldy than anticipated, and I think I'm only going to show tantalising bits each time. So for now, get yourselves under control. Control knows best, after all, and have a happy sleep time until the rough and tumble of our final countdown, which will reveal which episodes are the absolutely most desired by Doctor Who fans whom I surveyed. There's also going to be room for one more special guest. We've got one more in this episode. Hold on. But yes, next time, one more special guest. Probably the biggest name in Whodom, I'd say, who will open the show with his choices. And I'll close the show with mine. Probably the least special guest these podcasts can come up with. But anyway, how does that sound? Does it sound like I'm showing the world someone big and powerful in my special guest, only to reveal at the end a shattered, rather unimpressive man who's the one who's really behind it all? Well, yes, and that's about as many Macra Terror metaphors as we can wring out of this one, or get our claws into for now, anyway. But before we go, I've had so many people contribute to Film is Fabulous's Facebook page with their choices, or to add to my Blue Sky or my Twitter. Please do follow me on both. And so there's a lot of really interesting votes that weren't counted. But as I say, I had to draw a line, and I'd still be here counting them if I hadn't. And I think 112 is a reasonable sample. But somebody who was too late, who I still think you would be interested to hear from, is a bona fide Doctor Who writer. It's only Andrew Smith, the writer of the classic Tom Baker story, Full Circle. He was too late to have his votes counted, but not too late to have them heard by you. So here is what we could have won.
Hello, Toby. Right, so let me chip in with my 17 episodes that I would nominate as the ones I'd most like to see returned to the archive. Missing episodes of Doctor Who. As everyone I'm sure has said, this is difficult. And there's plenty of stuff that I don't list here that I'd love to see back. In fact, anything new coming back would be good. But I'll crack straight on with it and say... one thing I will say is it's very tempting to nominate an entire story that's missing to come back in its entirety. I've limited myself to one story like that, and I'll mention it when I get to it. Otherwise, I'm picking one, sometimes two episodes that are missing from a story. And I'm going to start with Marco Polo, the first proper historical The cavemen weren't historical, they were prehistory. And who even says that story's set on Earth, an unearthly child, with the cavemen? Anyway, so Marco Polo, first proper historical. It's directed by Waris Hussein. And I picked episode 4, The Wall of Lies, as it's the only episode where we don't have any telesnaps. So it would allow us to see something of that episode. We at least have telesnaps for the others. So there's one episode. That's the one I'd most like. But anything from Marco Polo would be good. And see more of Waris Hussein's work. The next one is The Mythmakers. I'm choosing episode 4, the final episode. I think Donald Cotton's The Gunfighters finished strongly, and I think that final episode of The Mythmakers does the same thing, and I'd really like to see how the programme handled the fall of Troy. After that, 2 episodes from really one of my all-time favourite stories, The Daleks Master Plan. It's such a joy. I remember listening to the soundtrack of that several years ago for the first time, and it made such an impact, particularly the ending. So the 2 episodes of that I'd like to see back are episodes 11 and 12. So we'll have the last 3 episodes of the story in the archive then. And it just leads up to all the events around the Time Destructor and the fate of Sarah Kingdom, which had a huge impact on me. The first time I heard it on the soundtrack, it would be quite something to have that back. After that, episode 4 of The 10th Planet, the one missing episode. I'm sure this has been nominated by a lot of people. It's the programme's first regeneration, Hartnell into Troughton. It's the first appearance of the Cybermen, and wouldn't it be lovely to have their first story complete in the archive? Following on from that, the one story that doesn't exist at all, but I'd like it all back, pretty please, and that's Power of the Daleks. I love this story. I've watched the animated version 3 or 4 times. David Whittaker does a great job writing this story. And it is one so I definitely would like back in its entirety. And it's, of course, Patrick Troughton's first story, or first look at a doctor dealing with regeneration, although it wasn't called that at the time. So all of Power of the Daleks is on my wish list. Followed by the one episode that follows it, it comes immediately after it, and that's episode 1 of The Highlanders. Now, being not just because I'm Scottish, but because the second Doctor and Jamie are kind of my pairing. They're the ones that I really remember strongly from my very early youth. And so the first appearance of Jamie is quite important to me. And yeah, I'd love to see that back. Next is The Web of Fear. Again, going back to my youth. The Web of Fear, episode 3. The only episode of that story that's missing from the archive after the rest was returned, or certainly was released in 2013. And again, it's a story I'd love to see complete. The Web of Fear is the first Doctor Who story I definitely remember watching as a child. The Yeti and the Underground are built into my memory from when I was aged 5 or 6. So that would be wonderful. Although I'm very grateful we had those 5 episodes returned in the meantime. And then after that, I'm going to just display my love for the Cybermen, my favourite monsters. They outrank the Daleks for me every day of the week. And I'm going for a couple of stories that we could complete if the episodes were returned, and that's the Moonbase episodes 1 and 3, and the Invasion episodes 1 and 4, to give us those 2 Cybermen stories in their entirety. I was tempted by 1 or 2 episodes of The Wheel in Space, but it's not the strongest story, and I think the Moonbase and the Invasion are worthy of, and I think would really be very well regarded if they existed completely in the archive. So those are my 17 episodes. Episode 4 of Marco Polo, episode 4 of The Mythmakers, 11 and 12 of The Daleks Master Plan, episode 4 of 10th Planet, the 6 episodes of Power of the Daleks, episode 1 of The Highlanders, 3 of The Web of Fear, and the remaining missing episodes of the moon base and the invasion. That feels very greedy of me. But I hope it matches up with the choices of many of the others who have contributed to this.
And so we had a Doctor Who writer at the beginning and a Doctor Who writer at the end, bringing this podcast full circle. And it also chimes with the issues that we've had with the Abominable Snowmen, where actually a recount was necessary, but one too late to feed into the previous episode. So it all points to the fact that this is flawed, that Doctor Who episode popularity is ever-changing, and this is a snapshot, and occasionally a slightly blurry one, of me very unscientifically reaching out to people, not all of whom got back to me in time, and some of whom who did get back to me in time had their votes miscounted. But there we go. Nothing's perfect, including the archive status of classic Doctor Who. So, until next time, thanks so much for listening, and thanks to all of those who took part. So we will discover in the next and final, I promise that's not going to be longer than 2 hours, who wins the battle between the historicals and the sci-fis, which episode of Marco Polo is most popular, and how the close battle between two climactic episodes means that in the end, there's only one vote between second and third place. And just how well, actually, has one particularly unloved story done? Surprisingly is the answer. What's that story? Well, until next time, thanks for attending this car boot sale of dreams. Ta-ta. Thanks for listening to Indefinable Magic. Tonight's episode, Fantasy Film Cans Part 2, was written and presented by me, Toby Haydock. It enjoyed special guest contributions from Mark Gatiss, Tom Burgess, and Andrew Smith. I'm grateful to them for giving me their time and lending me their voices, as I am to David Tennant, Nicholas Pegg, Peter Harness, Peter Purvis, Annika Wills, and Fraser Hines. See last episode for them. And thanks to Michael Dennis. These podcasts are only made possible by my Patreon at patreon.com/Toby Haydock, and its contributors provided much of the information herein. The music for Indefinable Magic has been specially composed by Dominic Glynn, and the artwork is by Dylan Patterson. The details I dropped in about MJ Matthews being Bill Matthews and the actor Mark Rose potentially being Mark Ross was based on initial research done by Stephen Griffiths, who's done lots of digging into Doctor Who actors. So both of those ideas definitely originated with him, not me. I'm grateful to all of those to whom I reached out and who answered the survey. They include Phil Newman, Charles Norton, Steve O'Brien, Mark Trevor Owen, Adam Parkin's wife, Harry Palmer, Ian Potter, Scott Pride, Jack Rayner, Dylan Rees, Steve Roberts, Eddie Robson, Alex Rowan, Gary Russell, Gavin Rymel, Stephen Shapansky, Jack Sharp, Stephen Seagal, Richard Smith, Dan Starkey, Ed Stradling, Jason Thompson, Pete McTighe, Paul Venezes, Colin Varney Earworm, Steve Walker, Gavin Ware, Peter Ware, Conrad Westmass, Steve White, Chris Williams, Rhys Williams, Lee Wood, and more, who I'll mention next time. Most of my podcasts, not this one, because I thought it unfair to profit from something where so many people had given their time for free, but most of my podcasts are available extremely far in advance of when you would listen to them on iTunes or YouTube or Spotify. At my Patreon page, patreon.com/Toby Haydock, where for as little as £3 a month, you get those advanced releases, you get exclusives, you get monthly AMAs, you get peeks behind the scenes at the various Who shenanigans I get up to, and you get exclusive content and access as well, usually 3 releases a week. That's at patreon.com/Toby Haydock, where everything is available at the lowest tier, which is £3 a month, which I think is pretty reasonable. It goes up to as much as you would like to give. There's also voluntary donations optional at Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/Toby Haydock, if rather than subscribe to a monthly thing, you occasionally want to show your appreciation, because this is how we freelancers earn a living these days. It's by putting stuff out there and hoping you will pop something in our tip jar, which is essentially what Ko-fi and Patreon are computerized versions of. However, if you can't contribute financially, that is completely understandable. We live in perilous times. What you can do that costs you nothing is to go to YouTube and like and subscribe my channel. I could really do with getting that. I need to start doing it properly. But anyway, do the YouTube thing, and to like, subscribe, give 5-star ratings too where you can, and perhaps even a couple of lines of review, so that it really polishes those algorithms for any passing trade. Wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, iTunes, Spotify, anywhere that you get them, all of those thumbs up and affirmations and comments really, really do help, because it's a jungle out there. I'm all over social media like a whore. I'm on Twitter at Haydock Podcasts and at Toby Haydock, where I do more than the sort of Doctor Who related stuff, because I'm a comedian. I have a comedy night in Manchester called Excess Malarkey, and that's at Excess Malarkey. That has its own Twitter. Oh no, it's not on Twitter. It's on Blue Sky. It's over on Blue Sky is Excess Malarkey, as am I. I'm Twitter and Blue Sky because I'm a bit of a doxy. That's so Blue Sky. I'm at Toby Haydock. There. I'm also on Instagram at toby.haydock, and I have a Facebook page as well as the aforementioned YouTube channel. I've got it all, apart from TikTok and OnlyFans, but who knows if there's enough interest. There won't be enough interest. And for non-regular listeners, I usually at the end do a bit of a post-credits as a sort of bonus, just a little thing to hang around for and go, oh, he's done a bonus. But frankly, this is already this episode is already an hour longer than it should be, and this podcast is already 3 episodes when I thought it was going to be 1. So if you want a bonus after all that, you're never going to be satisfied. But also, thanks for listening. Thanks for listening right to the end, which is right